everybody, welcome back to Mohawk Motors. My name is Jason. So if you recognize the sound in any of these video clips, that is in fact a lifter kit. Very common in the LS engines and LS based engines that GM used and manufactured from 99 all the way till like 2013, 2014. And sometimes it becomes catastrophic and you can't repair it. But a lot of times you can repair it. And I'm going to show you how these lifters work and how to fix them if they're getting noisy. Alright guys, so let's just start with a side-by-side comparison, shall we? Now, this is a stock lifter out of a 2008 L92 that I have gone through and reconditioned. I've got it all cleaned up. I made sure that the roller spins freely and smoothly because that's super important. And most important of all, our piston is freed up and moving smoothly. Can you see here? We've got about a 1/4 inch of travel in that piston, no problem at all. Now comparatively, here's another lifter out of that same engine that I haven't done anything to yet. And yes, the roller spins freely, but the problem here is the piston. And if you can see, that piston is not coming to the top of its travel and seating up against that snap ring, that retaining ring that holds it in place. And it also, it will not move. No matter how hard I push, that piston does not move. That piston is stuck in its bore. So what we need to do is get the piston unstuck, which in my experience, 99% of the time is just because of residue built up in the bore. We'll be able to work it in and out, in and out, in and out, and eventually get it all the way out so we can get it cleaned up. So let's start there. How do we get these things apart? So, right here in the top, there's essentially a square snap ring. And you just use a little flat pocket screwdriver and get that little snap ring out of there. Once you have the snap ring out, you should be able to dump the push rod cup and the restrictor disc out. I'll set those aside. Now, this is the tricky part. Now we have the main lifter body, and inside we have the piston. And our challenge here, what we need to try to do, is get that piston out of there. And the way that I've been doing it, and it works okay. There's probably a better way to do it, but this is how I have figured out to do it, and it works. So I'm gonna take my pocket screwdriver, poke down into the bottom of the piston, and depress the check ball to relieve any pressure trapped behind it. There we go. Now, I'm gonna take compressed air. I'm gonna try to blow right through that check ball, which will push the piston out of the lifter bore. If I'm lucky. I haven't been that lucky. Yeah, it felt like we moved, that piston maybe moved like a 1/16 of an inch. It didn't move much. So now we need to push the piston back down. And we're basically gonna repeat that process in, out, in, out, in, out, until we manage to get the piston to come all the way out of the lifter body. I'm gonna push the piston back down by putting it on the tip of this socket, which sits nicely inside the piston. I'm going to take the handle, the wooden handle of my hammer, just give it a few taps. See, I built pressure back up. I'm relieving it again. Now I'm going to blow air in there again. And I'm just going to keep repeating. Relieve the pressure. Lifter on the socket. Push it back down. Hit it with some pressure. Wash, rinse, repeat until I manage to work that piston all the way out of the lifter body. There we go. So now we've got the piston out. Below the piston, there's a spring. On the back side of the piston, you can see right here, there's a little piece of metal. And behind that, behind that little metal cap, there's a teeny little spring and a check ball. And that is as far apart as these lifters come. Now, once we have it all apart, now we have to get it clean. So to clean these things, in this cup, I have brake clean, just regular brake parts cleaner. I find it helps to break up the residue that jams up, clogs these things up. And what I'm using to recondition and clean them is just green Scotch-Brite, okay? This will remove the residue, but it won't remove metal. All of this stuff is very precisely machined because that is how it seals. It's a metal on metal surface, a metal to metal seal. So it is all precisely machined to fit together. So first I'm going to take my lifter body and a little piece of green Scotch-Brite. I'm going to shove it down in here, work it down into this thing as far as I can. I want to try to get it all the way down so it's touching the very bottom of the bore. I'm just going to spin it around inside of here. And remember, we've already removed most of the residue working that piston back and forth to actually get it out. But now we're just coming in here to clean up anything else left on the sides of the body, on the insides of the bore. We want everything nice and clean because we want our piston to be able to move up and down smoothly and freely. Twisting, twisting, twisting. That should be pretty good. See down inside of there? That's pretty clean. That's pretty good. Now we'll do the outside. Another piece of green Scotch-Brite. I'm just holding it and twisting. All I'm trying to do is clean it, guys. Not change the size, not change the diameter. I'm just trying to get everything cleaned up. And this Scotch-Brite will leave just the tiniest microscopic little scratches in these finished surfaces that'll actually help carry oil and keep everything lubricated when we put it back together. Oh, by the way, this is another lifter that I already had taken apart just to try to make things go a little faster. All from the same engine. There we go. So now we've got that lifter all cleaned up. Very nice. Now I need to find my piston. There it is. Piston, I'm going to do the same thing. The outside, I'm just gonna clean it with my Scotch Brite here. Make sure I get both ends. Get all that residue off. Give it a little rinse. There we go. And now that one's all nice and clean. I already put the check ball back in this. I take that check ball apart to make sure that it's there, it's in good condition, and the spring's not broken, but I don't have, but then I just put it back together. It'll get clean enough. Okay, now, we put it all back together. So I got my piston. Got my lifter body. My spring. My push rod cup. My snap ring. And my little flat orifice. So to put these all back together here, I take my lifter body and my spring, my big spring, I drop it down in there, make sure it sits down in its little counter bore. I take my piston, I make sure that the check ball and its little cup are in place, pushed all the way down firmly, and they are. So then that goes in next. Guys, what'll happen here is I've got air trapped below the piston that keeps wanting to push it back out. So I can use my little pocket screwdriver to depress the check ball. That lets my piston sit further down into the lifter body like it's supposed to. Then I take my little orifice plate, my push rod cup, and you'll know it's all assembled correctly if that push rod cup is just about even with the top of the lifter body. And then I take my snap ring, I push down on the push rod cup, and I push the snap ring down in. Just like so. I make sure my snap ring is seated on all four corners. And there's our lifter. And look now. Now we've got our nice travel, smooth, easy, just how it's supposed to be. And that one's all done. I drop it in the oil to soak until I'm ready to put them back in the engine. Now you've seen how I do it. Let's actually talk about how these hydraulic lifters work. So this is the same design that GM has used in their LS engines, as far as I know, in all of the Gen 3 and Gen 4 engines. So all the 99 to 06 engines, and then even basically all the way up until they went to the LT design V8s. Now, the one thing to consider is these are different from the lifters that on the DOD, the displacement on demand cylinders. Those use a totally different lifter with a spring and a bunch of, that's not what this is. But the cylinders that aren't displacement on demand, this is the lifter, okay? Now, how do they work, right? So the hydraulic lifter is intended, it's got that 1/4 inch of travel like I showed you. And that is to make up for and take up the lash in the valve train. And the way it does that is through hydraulic pressure, okay? When you start the engine up, the oil pump pumps the oil, it fills all the galleys, and in the lifter bores, the main oil galleys that run through the front and back of the engine intersect right here with this low spot in the lifter. And you'll see that there's a hole on one side of the lifter. And that hole allows pressurized engine oil into the lifter to come in here and take the lash out of the valve train. It also lubricates the valve train, but we'll get to that next. Now, the way that it takes up the lash, the piston and this little check ball and spring, that is the magic sauce to taking up that lash. So once the engine oil, the pressurized engine oil, has fed in through the hole in the side of the lifter, there's an opening inside of there. There's a cavity. And that cavity intersects with this one, this low spot in the piston. You see that? This low spot in the piston here in the middle. And you'll see there's another hole. And that hole allows pressurized oil to go into the piston in here. Once the piston is completely filled with oil, some of that oil travels around our little orifice plate and then goes up through the lifter, the push rod cup, up the push rod to lubricate the rocker arms at the top end of the engine. But in addition, that oil pressure is trying to go out through the hole. You'll see the hole in the bottom of the piston as well. And that's where our little check ball is. And the way this check ball works is the ball sits against the hole in the bottom of the piston. Then the little spring, and then the little hat that holds it all in place. And now with that in place, it will allow pressurized engine oil to come through in this direction, but it cannot escape back out in this direction. And what that does is it fills up the void at the bottom of the lifter bore and pushes the piston up. But it will only push with as much force as you have engine oil pressure. So, 40 PSI at idle, 60 PSI at wide open throttle. So it'll only push with as much force as you have engine pressure to exert against the backside of the piston. And that's what takes up the lash in your valve train. Now, where we start to have problems or your lifters get noisy or things like that is if, for whatever reason, this piston isn't able to take up all the lash. And that could be because there isn't enough oil pressure getting through and passing this check ball and then pushing against the piston to push up on it. It could be because there's just too much wear in the valve train. Maybe your rocker arms are worn out, your push rod is worn out or bent or something like that. And this piston has reached the top of its bore and it's still not enough travel to take up all the lash. It could be because this hole is clogged and it's not allowing oil to go into the lifter. There's lots of things that could cause it. But what I find often, and is demonstrated especially in engines that are poorly maintained or use just the lowest grade of oil or even run out of oil, is these lifters, the piston gets stuck inside the lifter, just like we had. And for the most part, it'll still be okay because unless you develop excessive lash in your valve train, everything is tight. All the lash is taken out of it. But if for some reason you develop a little lash, something starts to wear a little bit, especially after hundreds of thousands of miles, then you'll start to get that noise. Tiny at first, and then more, and then more, and then more. So going through these things, reconditioning, getting them all cleaned, making sure these lifters and these pistons can move inside the lifters the way they're supposed to, these things will be good as new. They'll work just fine. We've got all the oil out of it, so it will take the engine maybe a minute to actually pump enough oil up and pressurize everything and take all the lash out of the valve train. But I'm telling you, this is probably the #1 cause of noisy LS engines with valve train noise. It's just the pistons inside the lifters have gotten stuck. They're not able to travel and take the lash out of the valve train. So that's how I recondition them. I don't see anything else wrong with any of these lifters. I can't tell you how many times I've done this. And with the way the supply chain and new parts are nowadays, I have way more confidence taking a set of lifters out of an engine, inspecting them, cleaning them, and then putting them back together myself than I do in buying a set of new lifters from anywhere and throwing them in the engine without taking them apart and checking them out. So I hope this helps you guys. It really, to get the lifters out, you do have to pull the heads, so you'll have to spend a little money to get the lifters out of the engine. Obviously, you're going to need head gaskets, probably some other seals along the way too, but you really don't need to buy new lifters if you can, if you've got basic tools and some patience and you can get them apart. So I think that's it. I hope this helps you. Like I said, I've done this many, many times. I will say, and this is an important note, I don't know if I mentioned it, I keep the lifters as an assembly. So I don't take all 16 lifters apart and mix up all the pieces. I try to keep the piston, the spring, the cup, the snap. I try to keep all of the parts with the main lifter that they came out of. So I'm putting all the same pieces back together when I'm done. Because they do have, there may be microscopic, tiny little amounts of wear that these parts have seated together to each other. But as far as where the lifters go in the engine, doesn't matter. These are roller lifters. So they're just going to roll over that cam lobe no matter which hole you put them down into. And they don't really care. So I think that's it. If not, I'll bring you back and I'll tell you whatever else it is that comes to mind. Well, everybody, there wasn't anything else that I could really add for you that would have any more value or really good information about these lifters. That's pretty much all there is to them. But I wanted to wrap the video up. I wanted to let you know that your next video that you see will be after we get back from a big trip that we're currently on. So I've got 4 videos in the queue that are 90% recorded, but I wasn't able to get them finished in time to have them scheduled to upload for you while I'm gone. So it's going to be a little bit of a break, and then I'll get back I'll get them wrapped up and I'll get them up as soon as I can when we get back. So in the meantime, and to wrap this one up, here's a little teaser of what else I've been working on here down at the workshop. Been doing a lot of cleaning and painting, some taking apart, some putting together, some buying, and some planning.